In 2010, if you said a Chinese car company would outsell Ford, outsell Honda, and make Tesla nervous, you'd have been laughed out of the room. 15 years later, that company sells more electric vehicles than any business on earth. It builds its own batteries, its own chips, its own ships to carry its own cars across the oceans. And most people outside of China still can't name it. This is a story of how one country rewrote the rules of the car industry and why West never saw it coming. Rewind to the early 2000s. China's car industry was seen as a punchline. Companies copying Western designs, slapping on a new batch, selling cheap. Crash tests were an afterthought. Exports were a joke. But behind the scenes, the Chinese government made a bet almost nobody else was willing to make. Instead of trying to beat the West at building better gasoline engines, a race China was decades behind on. They skipped the engine entirely. Electric motors have a fraction of a moving parts of a combustion engine. No exhaust systems, no transmissions with hundreds of components, refined over a century of Western and Japanese engineering. It was a technology young enough that everyone was starting from close to zero. So, starting around 2009, China poured in subsidies, tax breaks, and cheap land for factories, not just for car makers, but for the entire supply chain underneath them. Battery chemistry, rare earth processing, charging infrastructure. They were not just building cars, they were building the entire pyramid a car industry can sit top of. The company at the center of the story didn't start as a car company at all. BYD, short for Build Your Dreams, began in 1995 making rechargeable batteries for cell phones. By the early 2000s, it was one of the world's largest battery supplier, making cells for the company like Nokia and Motorola. In 2003, BYD's founder made an odd move. He bought a failing state-owned car company. Analysts at that time thought it was a vanity project. Why would a battery maker wanted to build cars? The answer in hindsight was obvious. He didn't want to build cars. He wanted to build electric cars. He already had that one component. Every electric car company lives on and dies on the battery. While Western automakers spent early 2000s treating batteries as a part to buy from a supplier, BYD already owned the entire chain. Lithium processing, battery cell manufacturing, battery pack assembly, and the car wrapped around it. That vertical control is the single reason what happened next. By the early 2020s, BYD was not just competitive on price, it was undercutting everyone, sometimes selling EVs for less than half the price of comparable Western models, while reportedly still making a profit. Western and Japanese manufacturers could not follow. Their battery supply chains ran through third parties in South Korea and Japan, adding cost at every step. BYD had none of those middlemen. Then came the second shock. BYD didn't just sell cheap cars in China, it started shipping them everywhere. Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe, building its own fleet of car carrier ships to cut shipping costs even further. By the mid-2020s, BYD has overtaken Tesla in total EV sales worldwide, and Chinese brands collectively were building a larger share of world's electric vehicles than the United States, Germany, and Japan combined. Government in Europe and US responded the only way they had left: tariffs, steep ones, in some cases over 100%, aimed squarely at slowing Chinese EV imports before they hollowed out domestic manufacturing. It's a rare thing in auto industry. A trade war fought not over oil but over lithium. Here's the part most car documentaries miss. This isn't really a story about who builds a better engine. Combustion engines are essentially a solved problem. The difference between a Toyota and a Volkswagen engine are marginal at this point. The real battleground moved to software, batteries, and speed. And the speed is where legacy automakers, weighed down by the century of factories, unions, dealership networks, and internal bureaucracy, simply couldn't compete. Chinese EV makers, unburdened by any of the legacy infrastructure, could design a car, test it, and ship a new model. In a fraction of time, it takes a company like Ford and Volkswagen to get a facelift approved internally. Cars started shipping with software that updated overnight, the way a phone does, a concept that most Western automakers are still catching up to. This is the uncomfortable truth for the legacy industry. They didn't lose because their engineers were worse, they lost because the entire structure of how to build cars was built for a different era. So where does that leave everyone else? In markets without heavy tariffs, Southeast Asia, Latin America, parts of the Middle East, Chinese brands are expanding fast, often becoming a buyer's first EV. In the US and Europe, tariffs have bought legacy automakers time, not a solution. Many are now doing what once seemed unthinkable, licensing Chinese EV platforms and battery technologies just to catch up. And for buyers, the effect is already visible. EV price globally had come down faster that no one predicted few years ago, largely because Chinese competition forced everyone else to respond. Whether that's a win for consumers or a warning sign for a domestic industry depends entirely where you are standing. 15 years ago, this was a company making batteries or flip phones. Today, it's reshaping where the entire world's cars come from. Whatever comes next in the industry probably won't come from Detroit, Stuttgart, or Tokyo first. It will come from a factory floor in Shenzhen, and most of us don't even notice until it's already on the roads. If you want the next episode to cover how tariffs are actually reshaping this race in real time, drop it in the comments. That might be the next Wheelcraft deep dive. Thank you.